Indeed.
So the challenge and opportunity of technology to the Caribbean culture and identity. Caribbean civilization, like all civilizations, can be found on a map. Its genesis and its current reality are dependent upon technology, and technology invented through human urge to overcome our geographical constraint. Our first ancestors, First Nations, Africans, indentured, and all really with very little space to maneuver, made very difficult choices to overcome formidable obstacles through innovation and determination. The Caribbean citizen has thus evolved the capacity to create humanizing structures where options seem not to exist before. Following Ferdinand Braudel, a historian from the Annales School, French school, he sees geography as the stage upon which the actors of history cross. And the task of the historian is to narrate the interaction of the actors upon the stage using different perspectives of time. In this paper, what I will do is to narrate the interaction of technology across the human actors, interacting with the human actors on the Caribbean stage, showing that Caribbean civilization, from its beginning, was shaped and will continue to be shaped by global forces and by technological innovation. Civilizations like walled cities have gates to control negotiation of people coming in and out, which is what we borrow, what we refuse to borrow. That's really the stuff of identity. Every civilization, whether Eastern or Western, hot or cold, to use Levi-Strauss designation, modern or primitive, now has 5 gates that they use to control, to react through, and to allow people in and out of. The first gate that was open to us was the land gate, as the earliest gate as our ancestors walked across the Bering Straits 18 to 15,000 years ago, making the way across the continent, coming to the shore, and waiting there until the sea gate opened. That was civilization 1.0. When the sea gate opened, as they did the innovation of getting fire and trees and stones to make a boat, and they crossed from the continent to the islands, then we had the first civilization happening here within the Caribbean. Late in 1492, the sea gate would bring another group of people when wind power was harnessed, and navigation and a compass, and new technologies were used to cross from Europe to our civilization. And that was civilization 2.0. And it was a brutal meeting of peoples that were not ready for each other, of two cultures which settled eventually in a peasantry with farming and collision and collecting of precious objects as a main form of the economy. The air gate opened just before the Second World War, and this caused a further compression of the globe and much more cultural interaction between ourselves and peoples from all over the world. And this opened the tourist industry as we know it today. And I would see that as Caribbean civilization 3.0. The telecommunications gate opened, first in the 15th century with the printing press, and then in the 19th century with the telegraph, and then further with the 20th century with the arrival of radio, cinema, eventually television. And the face-to-face with other cultures facilitated cultural borrowing at a very rapid rate. And that would be Caribbean civilization 4.0. The digital gate opened in the 1990s with cable television and then the internet. And now a multiplication of devices that use cloud services and all kinds of things, shaping Caribbean culture and identity in very profound ways. And this would be Caribbean civilization 5.0. And so you see, we have had a lot of upgrades to the civilization through technological innovation and through technologies that we are interacting with. Each of these 5 gates, when opened, brought new people, changed the social arrangements and the economy, and ultimately the mentality, the way that we think, the idea system of the people who inhabit this geographical stage that we call the Caribbean archipelago. And each gate has changed the dynamic of Caribbean civilization, offering significant innovation while bringing significant challenge to Caribbean people, to culture, and to our identity. The collision between the First Nations and the Europeans in 1492 brought rupture to an ancient way of life and the enslavement of the original peoples. The migration of the Dutch Jews in 1640s brought a plantation system, a plantation economy, and a whole other way of being in the Caribbean. On the streets of the Caribbean today, in our families, in our schools, in our businesses, in our organizations, and I would say in this very room that we're sitting here, there are people with very different worldviews, very different mentalities, and ultimately very different identities, all calling themselves Caribbean. And the multiple identities have served as several sources. First is the opening up of all of these gates and the interaction that we've had on the world stage, difference in the economy, different parenting approaches, but ultimately the availability of technology. And while defined by generations, these groupings have very different understandings and experiences of Caribbean culture, and thus different aspirations for their future as Caribbean citizens and for Caribbean civilization ultimately. It has really become commonplace now to speak about these differences as generations, each having a distinct identity and experience of Caribbean. Each has a different way of interacting with technology, others and with the environment. The traditionalists, and I see we have some here, people born before 1945, and the baby boomers, those who are born between 46 and 64. Generation X, born between 65 and 1976. The millennials, or Generation Y, born between 1977 and 1995. Generation Z, or I generation, born between 1996 and 2005. And now they're even speaking about the Alpha generation, born after 2006. The traditionalists and the baby boomers came to consciousness during our pre-independence time. They came of age in the struggle against colonization, and they etched their teeth on Marcus Garvey, on Pan-Africanism. They were into the heady discourse on the West Indian Federation, and after this failure, on regionalism as ways of understanding our destiny and where we are. They were preoccupied with Caribbean identity and what it meant to be an independent nation. They were debating economic theory and looking for middle ground between the East and the Western models of economy. For the most part, they subscribed to social democracy as an economic theory of choice. And through this theory, committed themselves and the future of the nation and the whole region to nationalism and an investment in our people. Education and healthcare had to be given to all Caribbean citizens. And we were the new Greeks, a string of small islands that would dominate the world. Culture and race was a mode of discourse. And the search was for the new Caribbean man, not woman, in those days. But today that would be frowned upon significantly. And this quincentennial character who embodied Caribbeanness and the West Indian identity. By 1968, the Black Power movement brought a new twist to the identity debate. And businesses which in the 1940s were willing to publicly acknowledge in their recruitment ads that blacks need not apply were now forced to desegregate, accepting all citizens to all jobs in the society. And this was a time of heady nationalism, optimism, and a clear sense of a future state for the Caribbean that was far better than anything that we had ever experienced anywhere in our past. In 1970, the Black Power Revolution in Trinidad happened with protests and uprisings in that island. How did this energy, this vision, this Caribbean person, this West Indian civilization dwindle in the 1980s to such a pathetic whimper? Part of the reading requires us to understand that there are other actors on our historical stage that are not human actors. If I want to be technical, we'll call them quasi-actors. And those are the actors of the structures of globalization, the actors that come from far-reaching economic theories that I will speak a little towards. From the Great Depression of 1929, the world political economy operated on a regulatory model. Like the Dutch capitalism, mercantile system, before it in 1645 to 1810, the regulatory model privileged the nation state over the universal. It privileged the citizen over capital, and it privileged the local over the global. The Caribbean came to independence in a regulatory cycle, and the economic cycle gives the world the rules to interpret the present and to predict the future good of our society. Hence, the assumptions of the traditionalists and the baby boomers were frustrated in the 1970s as the world went into a deregulatory cycle, privileging the global over the local, capital over humans, universal over the nation state. The Caribbean was part of that wave, not necessarily by choice, but as a result of various global treaties that we had to sign if we wanted to continue to play ball in the global markets. And with the hope that we would get something to access funding and skills and enhance the small economies that were very fragile at that time. Privatization and liberal economy became the hallmark of the 1980s and the 2000s, up until really 2008. Reagan and Thatcher were the architects of this new economic model, and for conscious traditionalists and baby boomers, this was a time of great dislocation. Others followed the creed of American rapper 50 Cent. Get rich
Or die trying.
or die trying. The best analogy that I could use is that if you're in a boat heading in one direction and the wave action and current is going with you, and all of a sudden something happens and the current changes and is now going against you, you're no longer making the kind of progress that you thought that you could have made in the first place. Well, the global economic currents change every 50 to 70 years. And this has been happening since the 1300s, that has been trekked from Venetian capitalism in the 1300s to Dutch capitalism in the 1600s to British capitalism in the 1800s to American capitalism in the 1900s to
Asian capitalism.
whichever one you want to call in the 2000s. And the bets are on. The bets are on. But this, in 2008, the global economic tidal changed again. And the 2008 financial crisis triggered a switch back to a regulatory system. So today, the global tide is now pushing towards the nation, towards the local, towards privileging of the human over capital, back to the direction of social democracy, participation in the economy, and back to the thing that we knew when we first became independent nations. In the 1980s and 90s, we adopted the rules of the world political economy. We privatized. We increased the role of business. We shrunk the role of government. We lowered our taxes. We applied so as to stimulate investment. In this liberal economy model, we failed to safeguard the common good. We failed to safeguard the most vulnerable. We failed to safeguard the development of all of our people. Greed became the highest value of this civilization, creating an opportunity for corruption at every level of our society, state and private sector. And this model of economy has challenged everything that we hold precious about what we consider essential to Caribbean civilization. The role of a government is to create the conditions necessary to grow the pie so that we all have a bigger and bigger share of the pie. They do this by facilitating the next phase of innovation and growth through policy and through infrastructure. And there are three things that governments do. They do redistribution to regulate the economy. They also they provide public goods like roads, healthcare, education, but that also is the formation of the citizens for the next stage of growth in economy and stabilization of the macroeconomy, ensuring sustainable growth, sustainable prices, and low unemployment. But when a government gives up these functions and allows private sector to take over the running of the economy, what happens is the common good is what is put at risk. Technical innovation. The millennial generation has grown up with more technological transformation than any generation before it from the dawn of civilization. We move from analog to digital in a very short time. Cassette recording, anybody remember those? Tapes, records, paper and pen, people write with those still, radio and television, cinema, and all forms of media have been dramatically transformed. First came the calculators in school, then the computers, then the personal computer, then the hand and digital device. Add to this the internet and the cloud storage, and the revolution is dramatic. We hold in our hands our mobile smartphones with more computing power than was used to launch a rocket that landed a man on the moon in the 1970s. The dramatic transformation in technology is not just about the efficiency. It is also about a fundamental transformation in the paradigm of society. Marshall McLuhan, the great Canadian media specialist, says, every new technology is an amputation. Every new technology is an extension of the human. So it is both an amputation and an extension. How many of you remember phone numbers? Any phone number you remember, it's before you had a cell phone. And any number you learned after a cell phone, you no longer know it because your memory has been amputated because the phone has extended your memory. New technology also changes the mode of communication and the way of human consciousness, the political description and forms of political organization. Before the printing press, we used to talk about the alphabet. Our consciousness was mythical consciousness, and we were civilization. And our political organization was pretty much a city-state or empire. With the printing press, our mode of communications moved to mental consciousness, industrialization, and the nation-state. And now with the digital revolution, we are moving to integral consciousness, planetization, and what is now called noetic polity. That is a group of like-minded people who live in different nation-states. So it's no longer about the geographical boundaries. It's now about like-mindedness wherever we find that happening. We understand ourselves and our political organizations no longer, I see in him, but I prayed for mercy still. My phone is a sophisticated communications device. It is also a library. I have 1,800 books on my phone presently, more than I have in my physical library. And it is a digital assistant and a research assistant. It connects me with the globe. The millennial generation grew up in this massive technological transformation. Generation Z and Alpha only know a digital world. They do not understand an analog world at all. The communications between the generations is quite absurd. The traditionalist is musing about the fountain pen, while the boomer is talking about the phone, and X is talking about email. The millennial is on social media, and young teens no longer have emails or Facebook. They're talking about Snapchat, Kik, or Pinterest. We have gone from Web 1.0 to Web 3.0. And the internet is no longer a bulletin board where we put things. It's interacting with us. It is being transformed as we search and use it. It is transforming to us and to what we understand and what we want. Web 4.0 is when the web starts interacting with your smart house, your smart car, your smartphone, and it starts now being tailor-made for your life. So as you come home, the lights are already on, the air conditioner is already cooling down, or as you move to the car is already starting up and cooling down for you. Technology has made life a lot easier. Everything is at your fingertips. The technology is also changing behavior and shaping personality, making us more impatient, impulsive, and maybe even narcissistic and antisocial, which is not the Caribbean way. We are people known for great hospitality and for real friendliness. The millennial generation is highly attached to their device and highly connected with many outside of their country, whether in the region or in the world beyond. They chat and share freely with people that they have never met, except in social digital space. They think globally, and while they enjoy our Caribbean culture and identity, they are world citizens with a taste for things available on the world scene. They shop online and they crave the lifestyle not available in their home territories. They are seeking to make their mark on the world stage. Their value is the system is very different from all the former generations that have gone before it. We have generations side by side who think so differently. Traditionalists and boomers who are protective of Caribbean culture and identity, wishing to protect us from all the outside influences. And millennials who are Caribbean, but they're playing on a world stage. There's a wonderful YouTube video that says Ships Happens, that brings the point home. Half of the half-life of knowledge is now 2 years. So half of everything that you learned that was cutting edge today, 2 years from today, it is no longer valuable and no longer worth knowing. It is also saying that we should be preparing people in our schools today for jobs that do not yet exist, using technologies that have not yet been invented. Opportunities. Thomas Friedman has two concepts that are vital here. The first came in his 2005 book, The World is Flat, where he talks about the flattening of the world, which really benefits people like ourselves. How do you buy your books? How do you buy the electronics that you really want? How do you get all the things that you couldn't get before because we can't get them in the shops that we have? We buy them online. We have an address in Miami. It ships down to us, a credit card, Amazon, and that has flattened the world, because in the States you could get in your car and within half an hour you could get anything you want. Here, it's very, very different. The second thing he speaks about is Law's More in his recent book, Thank You for Being Late. The three accelerating processes. The first is Moore's Law, which is a rapid acceleration of technology. It's not just that it is developing, it is accelerating the rate at which it's developing. Business is also accelerating the rate of development. And also climate change is accelerating the rate of development. These three accelerations are driving civilization forward at a rate that is no longer stoppable by us. It is not just that we have rapid development, but rapid development is the business of the day. This is the new normal way of living. This is what technology is bringing. And the business climate and all the change that we now see is a way of life for us in the Caribbean. And in the Caribbean, we will either claim victim status and allow this to happen to us, and one more time we'll cry as sufferers in some wretched cry, or we will do as our ancestors have done and prepare ourselves and jump into the great dialogue and begin contributing to the conversation. We have a choice. We're not victims of our own destiny. Most of our children are still educated in 19th century classrooms, and this is our biggest obstacle to development. We have digital children being educated in an analog school by analog teachers, and in many cases they're not being taught skills needed for them to function as digital citizens. Things like collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving. Having digital skills will improve their chances of being employed in the workplace of tomorrow. The indiscipline in the schools and the high level of disinterest in education as it is being taught is, I believe, connected to this challenge. We are educating our children in a way that they cannot stand education anymore because their minds have changed and are operating through other paradigms. This is not a passing fad. This is the new normal. And if we're not going to make the change in education, we're not going to prepare the Caribbean for civilization 5 or 6.0. Most of our islands have very high unemployment. Our traditional sectors of tourism is doing what it can, but this is not rapidly expanding industry. The offshore sector is under pressure, and the new global laws tighten transparency of citizens of Europe and the US, and thus making it more difficult to benefit from registering assets from an offshore investment or arrangement. We have exported labor to the world and to Panama in the early 1990s, to Britain after the Second World War, and throughout the Caribbean, our people moved to bring needed skills where needed. And the next phase of business is emerging very differently. There is a new model that is emerging. Airbnb is one of the fastest growing hotel chains in the world, but it doesn't own any buildings or any rooms. Uber is a rapidly expanding taxi service that owns absolutely no cars. The workplace of tomorrow will be a very different workplace than the workplace of today. And when our people go to the big countries, they do exceptionally well for themselves and for their people and for the firms they work for. What if we found a way for our citizens to work in the digital world and be paid legally while living in the Caribbean? That would be an amazing thought. Guess what? It's already happening. Not sure about the legal payment, but they're already doing it. Our young people in Barbados are providing services to businesses overseas, and they're earning a living by this. And some provide professional services, and some are cultural entrepreneurs. Imagine too, if it was possible for a single mother who had secondary education to work at home and to collect a decent wage at the end of the week. What if she could then teach her child or teenage children to participate in that workplace, thus creating a cottage industry where the whole family is providing income for that family and benefits? To make this new approach to being gainfully employed become a norm will require a new way of thinking and a new policies and framework. It will require a different approach to taxes, just as we will develop special zones for manufacturing back in the 80s and 90s. Could we create a special zone for the digital native to operate from the Caribbean while playing and working on the global stage? I think that that's what we need to do if we actually going to get up to scratch with Caribbean Civilization 6.0. The UN has already said that the internet is embedded in our lives today and should be seen as a normal right. The workplace of tomorrow is going to be transformed dramatically over the next decade or so. And I'm not aware of any of our countries presently that are seriously thinking of the rapid transformation and seeking to find ways to prepare our citizens for this transformation. Barbados has already over 1,000 Airbnb listings, and this is just a start. What are the other opportunities? The great challenge that we face is that our leaders, our educators, our captains of industry are traditionalists and baby boomers who are analog persons living in a digital universe. The workplace of tomorrow is primarily a digital workplace which will allow people to live in one location, work in a sector, contributing to different geographical locations with people living in other countries. The analog brain, insular nationalism, and our readiness to claim victimhood are the greatest obstacles to us moving to development. We have used fire and stone to create boats to cross oceans. We have survived against the most brutal forms of human oppression and managed to be free from colonial rule. Against all odds, we have managed our affairs for 50 years as young nations without any fundamental challenge. We have evolved many times to face the burning issues of the day. We can evolve one more time to face the challenge of harnessing technology to create a just and fair society where all people in our society can participate. There was a sign on a gas station in Trinidad which said, "Experience is a comb that life gives to you when you've lost your hair. Those who have the comb have no hair. Those who have the hair have no comb." What we need to do is bring the comb and the hair together in a partnership of the generations to create a way of thinking across generations to plan for the workplace of tomorrow. And this is not just about technology and skill. It is about seeing ourselves and living as a world citizen with Caribbean values. If Anansi, that West Indian spider, lived in the 21st century, there would be incredible stories already written about how we would get to this new destination. It is my belief that the glory days of the Caribbean are not necessarily behind us. We have the unique capacity to evolve, to innovate, and to use the tight spaces that were given to us to produce incredible innovation and results. We are accustomed to build culture and to flourish against all the odds. We have used a dustbin to produce music, a ghetto to produce a reggae superstar. We have produced world leaders in many fields and professions. Our grandmothers were economists and miracle workers, raising children with little or nothing. This is not our past. This is our unstoppable future if we dare to live the legacy that we have inherited. Thank you for your patience and mercy.